Objects, half moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. Weird. Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
In April 2020, the United States Department of Defense took the unprecedented decision to declassify and release to the world's media 3 previously classified recordings made by US Navy pilots, showing what the DoD described simply as unexplained aerial phenomena. The recordings, made between 2004 and 2015, appear to show a kind of circular flying object, which might at one time have been labelled a flying saucer. Upon its release, the footage went viral on social media, and unusually was accompanied by no explanation from the authorities as to what the flying discs might be. The accompanying press release simply stated, "The Department of Defense is releasing the videos in order to clear up any misconceptions by the public on whether or not the footage that has been circulating was real, or whether or not there is more to the videos. The aerial phenomena observed in the videos remain characterized as unidentified." A marked change in approach from the Cold War era, which, as we shall see, was a time of denial, lies, and admitted cover-ups by some of the United States' most powerful institutions. The state of New Mexico, on the southern border of the United States, where in July 1947 the town of Roswell became the site of one of the most notorious cover-ups in American history, although the repercussions wouldn't be felt until several decades into the future. A rancher named William Mack Brazel was out riding when he stumbled upon a large amount of mysterious-looking wreckage. Brazel informed the local sheriff, who in turn reported the wreckage to the Army Air Force Base at Roswell, believing it to be the result of some kind of military air exercise. Air Force Intelligence Officer Jesse Marcel drove out to the ranch and collected some of the wreckage, and is said to have been so excited by the strange, otherworldly material that he rushed home in the early hours to show pieces of it to his family. At the time, recent press reports of lights in the sky and flying saucers in other parts of the country had already piqued the public interest. So when local Air Force press officer Walter Haut issued a press release claiming that the Air Force was in possession of a flying disc, the story became an international sensation overnight. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday, when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers. The flying object landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and subsequently loaned by Major Marcel to higher headquarters. The matter was referred to General Roger M. Ramey of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, and it was here that the story was to be quashed, almost as quickly as it had been born. General Ramey ordered a press conference, at which he showed off some sections of what was purported to be the famous wreckage. The news reports issued the following day were anticlimactic, to say the least. An examination by the Army revealed last night that a mysterious object found on a lonely New Mexico ranch was a harmless high-altitude weather balloon. Indeed, the fragments on display at the press conference, small pieces of wood, rubber and tin foil, were less than impressive, and with that, public interest in the story waned. Locally, however, many insisted that the material displayed by General Ramey did not come from the Roswell wreckage, and stories of Air Force personnel threatening witnesses and rumors of a second, more extensive crash site which was hidden from the public ensured that the story would never quite die. Gary Heseltine is the founder and editor of UFO Truth magazine.
I personally have met many of the top researchers involved in the Roswell story. I think there is something like 800 witnesses loosely based throughout the decades that have been traced, and without a shadow of a doubt it's a cover-up by the US Air Force, the US government, and was one of the pinnacle things that set us on a path of ufology, the modern era.
It was decades later, under intense pressure from UFO researchers, that the US Air Force was finally forced to admit that the weather balloon story was a lie.
We were in a Cold War, and there was a real fear of Soviet expansion, and there'd be a Third World War, which would of course been a nuclear atomic war, which would have probably decimated the entire Earth. And I think that was a genuine reason why they didn't want people to think, well, actually there might be aliens as well, and that's another threat. We could have an alien invasion. Personally, I don't think it stacks up longer term.
As we shall see, there had been a cover-up at Roswell. But a cover-up of what? In 1948, the US Air Force began to take an official interest in the UFO phenomenon.
The US Air Force decided to create a project called Project Sign. And I think in the early days this was a serious attempt to study what was genuinely baffling sightings, often by military personnel, commercial pilots. People were genuinely interested in the subject. And they set up this Project Sign with the intention of trying to get to the truth.
Project Sign was headed up by General Nathan Twining and was established in response both to the incident at Roswell and another major sighting that also took place in 1947. Mount Rainier, Washington State. On June 24, 1947, a civilian pilot named Kenneth Arnold was flying his light aircraft in search of a downed Marine Corps transport plane, for which the Air Force was offering a reward. Instead of the transport plane, Arnold encountered a series of strange lights, which, as he approached them, appeared to be saucer-shaped craft flying in formation at incredible speed.
Arnold knew the layout of the mountains, and he knew the distances between two peaks, which proved advantageous because he saw them past the beginning of one peak and he knew the distance between the other peak. So he was able to calculate the speed from the first one to reaching the second one, and it concluded that it was about 1,200 miles an hour.
Arnold provided a report of the incident to the Air Force, who, he said, took it seriously. He also spoke to reporters, and the subsequent news stories are thought to represent the first ever published use of the term flying saucer, based on Arnold's descriptions. However, the subsequent Air Force report into the incident was dismissive. If Arnold actually saw the objects, and if his estimate of distance is correct, his estimate of size cannot be, and vice versa. In view of the above, it seems probable that whatever objects were observed were traveling at subsonic speeds, and may therefore have been some sort of known aircraft. Public awareness of the flying saucer issue increased further in 1948, thanks to a highly publicized incident over Kentucky. January 7, 1948, the Godman Army Airfield in Kentucky receives multiple reports of some kind of unidentified airborne object. The object remained in view for over an hour and was witnessed by numerous senior officers, none of whom were able to identify it. Flight Commander Captain Thomas Mantell was conducting a routine training flight nearby and was ordered by the control tower to investigate the strange object. Mantell, who was flying without an oxygen mask, climbed to 15,000 feet and radioed the tower that he had the object in sight and was giving chase. That was the last report he made. The wreckage of his plane was later found 90 miles south of Godman Airfield. The story of a heroic Air Force pilot losing his life in pursuit of a flying saucer caught the public imagination and was widely reported by the press. But again, the Air Force report attempted to explain away the entire incident with an astonishingly unlikely conclusion. It appears to the present investigator, in summing up the evidence presented, that we are forced to the conclusion that the object observed in the early evening hours of January 7, 1948, at these widely separated localities, was the planet Venus.
By the end of 1948, they'd looked at about 1,000 reports during that 12-month period, and they came up with a report called the Estimate of the Situation. The estimate of the situation concluded that almost certainly some of the sightings involved interplanetary craft, which it was a term of the day in 1948, and that was sent to a general who was supposed to send it on to the president. The general said no, we're not having that as a conclusion, and basically ordered that all copies be burned.
With the vast majority of the incidents recorded in Project Sign being dismissed as mistaken sightings of everyday phenomena, the project was closed down by Air Force Chief of Staff General Hoyt Vandenberg on the basis that it was a waste of time and resources.
Who were genuinely good guys trying to get to the truth on Project Sign were replaced by a whole new team of investigators, but with a clearly different remit. And that remit was from 48 onwards with Project Grudge, which is to debunk everything.
According to a 1999 report by Gerald Haynes of the National Reconnaissance Office, the intention of the debunking remit was to alleviate public anxiety over UFOs, but a less charitable conclusion would be that sightings were explained away in order to discourage public curiosity about such events. UFO sightings were explained as balloons, conventional aircraft, planets, meteors, optical illusions, solar reflections, or even large hailstones. In any case, in the only official report ever produced by Project Grudge, hundreds of incidents and sightings recorded throughout the 1940s were dismissed in a variety of creative ways. The objects might possibly have been a series of balloons. It seems exceedingly probable that the object observed in this incident was a combination sun cloud effect. It seems likely that the young lady saw part of the late 4th of July celebration, a rocket from some amusement park perhaps. And the report's final conclusion was that all evidence and analyses indicate that reports of unidentified flying objects are the result of 1. Misinterpretation of various conventional objects, 2. A mild form of mass hysteria and war nerves, 3. Individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetrate a hoax or to seek publicity, 4. psychopathological persons. By the end of the decade, Project Grudge was quietly being wrapped up. In the early 1950s, two incidents in particular reawakened the Air Force's interest in UFOs. The first of these took place in Lubbock, Texas, in August 1951, when a group of professors from the Texas Technical College witnessed a number of mysterious lights moving in a U or V-shaped formation. Several days later, the same group of men witnessed the lights again, and separately, a student at the college claimed to have photographed the lights. The photographs, though never confirmed to be genuine, were widely publicized, necessitating an official Air Force response, which was to declare the mystery lights were most likely birds reflecting the glow from recently installed street lamps. The second incident, however, was not so easy to dismiss.
One of the biggest events that took place in UFO history was actually in 1952, when over two successive weekends, multiple UFOs were seen visually and on radar over the capital, Washington, D.C.
It began on the 19th of July 1952, when a Washington, D.C. aircraft controller spotted numerous objects on his radar that did not match any scheduled aircraft or flight plans. The readings were confirmed by other operators, while witnesses saw bright lights moving at incredible speeds over the White House. Two jet fighters were scrambled to intercept the mystery aircraft, but before the planes could reach Washington, all of the objects vanished from the radar.
And as soon as they were seen on radar, they would dispatch the pilots to go vectored to the area, and then mysteriously they would disappear.
When the jets subsequently left the area to refuel, the UFOs reappeared, suggesting a controlled, intelligent behavior that could not be dismissed as birds or errant weather balloons.
Over two successive weekends, there were multiple incursions over Washington, D.C., and despite planes being sent up, they could never find them. And yet the top radar guy said, we had 9 hours on one particular weekend where these objects were buzzing around, and he said these were real aircraft, those were machines. These were not temperature inversions, these were not swamp gas, these were not Venus, and he was convinced that there was real objects being seen.
Mysterious aircraft in the vicinity of the White House was a potential threat to national security, and the subsequent investigation went all the way to the top. Whilst public statements announced that the radar blips had been caused by temperature inversions, behind the scenes, plans were being formulated for a new Air Force project to investigate UFOs, named Project Blue Book. And this time, the CIA was to become actively involved.
The CIA were tasked at one point to investigate UFOs, but it was all done in secret. But their role was not to investigate the validity or truthfulness of UFO cases. It was really, how do we manage public perception? And what they did, they commissioned the Robertson panel, the scientists, which is 1953, that created the in a sense, the theme of the debunking program, which has been followed ever since.
In the 1999 Gerald Haynes report, he admits that the CIA had been monitoring the Air Force's investigations into UFOs since 1947, but that a decision had been made to keep the intelligence agency's interest in such matters a closely guarded secret. A classified CIA memo from the time stated, "No indication of CIA interest or concern is to reach the press or public, in view of their probable alarmist tendencies to accept such interests as confirmatory of the soundness of unpublished facts in the hands of the U.S. government." The Central Intelligence Agency was established in 1947 as a response to the growing threat from the Soviet Union, but it could be argued that it quickly developed a tendency towards spying on and controlling the American public. This is evidenced by the agency's attitude towards the supposed threat represented by UFOs. Rather than assist in the Air Force investigations, the CIA suggested a media campaign of public debunking to educate the population and discourage them from reporting UFO incidents. According to the Haynes report, this was to include the mass media, advertising, business clubs, schools, and even the Disney Corporation.
Most people aren't aware that the CIA commissioned a panel of top scientists of the day, and they said, how do we strip the aura that the public have, the fascination the public generally have for this mystery? And they concluded, after 2 days of talking about this, that the best way to strip the aura of flying saucers, which was the term of the day in the 50s, was to debunk it in all forms of media, i.e. film, TV, radio, newspaper. And so if you think about it, that's what happened. And America controlled the subject of UFOs worldwide, historically. And so literally anybody born after 1953 has lived in a genuine world of a debunking program.
When the CIA did undertake investigations, secrecy and outright deception was standard operating procedure. One such incident, outlined in the Gerald Haynes report, took place in 1955. Two elderly sisters contacted the Journal of Spaceflight to say that they had intercepted a strange alien code on their radio and had made a recording of the broadcast. For some reason, this caught the attention of the CIA-backed Office of Scientific Intelligence, and a field officer named Dewalt Walker was dispatched to interview the sisters and make a copy of the recording. Rather than admit to the CIA's involvement in such an investigation, Walker told the sisters that he worked for the Air Force. The recording, when analysed, turned out to be nothing more than some accidentally intercepted Morse code, and the incident was forgotten until 2 years later, when an independent UFO researcher decided to follow up on the case and wrote to the Air Force, asking for clarification around who had taken the recording and what had been done with it. The result was a lengthy correspondence in which the Air Force and the CIA attempted to shift the responsibility to another unnamed government agency, before finally stating that the recording had been destroyed to save file space. This was not an isolated incident, and it may even be the case that the celebrated urban legend of the mysterious Men in Black, unnamed agents who are said to appear out of nowhere in response to reports of UFO sightings, might actually be down to CIA agents acting suspiciously and refusing to identify themselves. Over the next decade, Project Blue Book increasingly became a bureaucratic exercise in box-ticking and debunking, with the barest minimum of investigative work undertaken. Any report of a balloon-like object was recorded as a balloon. Any mysterious light in the sky was simply a star, the planet Venus or the Moon.
Project Blue Book is littered with cases. You could have 4 aviation pilots all looking at a triangular object in front of them from 4 different aircraft perspectives, and they'd say it was Venus or temperature inversions.
Reports and press releases from the project began attracting criticism from UFO researchers and reputable witnesses who felt that their testimony and professionalism was being undermined. One such example came in the summer of 1955. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol reported that an Air Force base near Oklahoma City had tracked up to 4 UFOs simultaneously, and that several of them had descended very rapidly, from about 22,000 feet to about 4,000 feet in just a few seconds, which was well beyond the capabilities of any conventional aircraft. At the same time, eyewitnesses saw multicolored lights and mysterious diamond-shaped aerial objects. Project Blue Book concluded that witnesses had simply mistaken the planet Jupiter and bright stars such as Rigel and Betelgeuse for something more sinister. However, this report was ridiculed when independent experts pointed out that these stars and planets are not visible from Oklahoma in the summer. You would literally have to be on the other side of the planet to have seen them, not to mention the fact that the UFOs were tracked on radar, which is unlikely to have picked up a planet located 365 million miles from Earth. Similarly, in 1966, 2 police officers spotted a disc-shaped silvery object with a bright light emanating from its underside in the sky above Ravenna, Ohio. The police officers gave chase, following the object at high speed for over half an hour, with officers from several other jurisdictions joining in the pursuit. The event made national news, and a report was duly submitted to Project Blue Book, where the official response was that the officers must have been at various points chasing a satellite, a star, and even the moon. The officers, one of whom was a former Air Force pilot himself, angrily rejected this finding, and even Ohio Congressman J. William Stanton commented on the incident.
The Air Force has suffered a great loss of prestige in this community. Once people entrusted with the public welfare no longer think the people can handle the truth, then the people, in return, will no longer trust the government.
Prophetic words for Project Blue Book.
The 3 US Air Force projects, Sign, Grudge and Blue Book, basically ran for 22 years, but by '69 it closed. Why did it close? Well, that's quite simple. They found a mechanism and a way to close it, and the mechanism was to ask a university, and it went to a guy called Edward Condon, and it became known as the Condon Committee. And basically they had a 2-year contract to look at all of the best evidence in theory and make conclusions to the US Air Force. Well, literally on day 1, Condon, who was a very well-regarded physicist, he privately said, look, this is just a paper exercise, we already know it's a load of rubbish.
As with Project Sign and Project Grudge, the Condon Committee delivered a final report which was long on pages but short on revelations. A panel chaired by Yale astronomer Gerald M. Clements studied the report for 6 weeks and concluded that,
on the basis of present knowledge, the least likely explanation of UFOs is the hypothesis of extraterrestrial visitations by intelligent beings. No high priority in UFO investigations is warranted by data of the past 2 decades.
What you had literally from the late 40s onwards until it finished for 20 years was a debunking program. And we kind of know and always suspected as UFO researchers that many of the best cases never found their way into what should have been this definitive project, Project Blue Book. And we know that because General Bollinger actually admitted in the late 60s and early 70s that there was a secret program and the best cases didn't go into Project Blue Book. So I think the general conclusion is, as we look back on the history of ufology, is that for many, many years the Project Blue Book and certainly Project Grudge were nothing but public relation exercises for the public.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
in 1969, the very same year that Project Blue Book was disbanded, NASA achieved what many had thought impossible, and some still think impossible, sending Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins to the moon, and bringing them back alive. It was inevitable that the validity of such an extraordinary achievement would be called into question, and thousands of conspiracy theorists around the world soon began pointing out what appear to be strange anomalies in the images and footage presented to the public,
mismatched shadows and evidence of tampering in photographs, together with questionable physics and the lack of stars in the footage from the moon's surface. More intriguing still is the staggering admission from NASA in more recent years that much of the original footage and telemetry data from the Apollo moon flights has apparently been lost.
An intensive search of archives and records concluded that the most likely scenario was that the program managers determined there was no longer a need to keep the tapes, since all the video was recorded elsewhere, and they were erased and reused.
Critics immediately jumped on this admission as further evidence that NASA had something to hide.
If you think about it, if we had the technology to get to the moon in 1969, don't you find it a bit bizarre, even for the most ardent skeptic, to think, well, if we could do it in 69, why haven't we been back since 72, which was the last mission? It really doesn't make sense. And actually, you find in the world of conspiracy that some people will say, well, no, actually the moon missions didn't actually happen. I think they did. I personally think that the footage of Neil Armstrong touching the ground, I don't think we had the means to do that live. And I think that was recreated in the studio, but I personally think we did go to the moon. But undoubtedly, there's a lot of cover-ups.
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike, it really is.
So, were the moon landings really faked? Or was NASA hiding something even more extraordinary?
There's a huge amount of data that would say that things were seen en route to the moon, that things were seen possibly on the moon, the far side of the moon. I mean, there's bits of footage where, absolutely unambiguous footage, where you see a lovely colour shot of the lander coming back towards the main craft, and a UFO, a white sphere, passes underneath.
UFO researchers have scoured the photographs and footage from NASA missions, looking for unusual or unexplained objects, and even NASA personnel have spoken out on the issue. Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell stated that he believed 90% of reported UFO sightings were the result of alien activity, and that he personally was aware of several UFO visits during his career, and that each one had been covered up. In interviews, he spoke of a secret cabal in the government that was studying alien bodies recovered at Roswell. NASA issued a terse statement in response.
Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinions on this issue.
Mitchell later retracted the claims, stating they were just speculation. Similarly, celebrated Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin once claimed to have seen strange lights flying alongside the astronauts en route to the moon, but later stated that his words had been taken out of context and misunderstood. The idea of secret UFO bases on the moon stemmed from claims that private ham radio operators had managed to record secret off-air transmissions between the Apollo 11 crew and Houston from the surface of the moon.
Allegedly on Apollo 11, Neil Armstrong went over the air to say that UFOs are parked up, as it were, on a crater rim looking down at them.
These babies are huge, sir. Enormous. Oh my God. You wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out there, lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon, watching us.
The actual recordings have never emerged, but the idea of aliens on the moon took hold, with hundreds of researchers scouring images of the moon's surface for signs of hidden bases, with some claiming that the clearest images were deleted by NASA. NASA denies this.
NASA does not track UFOs. NASA is not involved in any sort of cover-up about alien life on this planet or anywhere in the universe.
Do I think that there's a potential cover-up? Yeah, I think there's evidence to say that there's a secret space program, but it's to what extent? I certainly don't think it's fleets and fleets of huge battle cruisers in space like a Star Trek scenario, but I do think we probably have done a lot of other stuff in space and missions that nobody's aware of. And if you think that some kind of contact has been made, ET, on the moon, I think that's entirely conceivable, because I really don't understand why we've not been back.
The Rendlesham Forest incident is considered by UFO researchers to be second only to Roswell in terms of its significance.
Britain's most famous case is what's called the Rendlesham Forest incident, and it's regarded now in UFO historical terms as being up there with Roswell. That's how good the case is. And some people would say that in many ways it's a better case than Roswell because it contains more evidence.
It began on December 26, 1980, at RAF Woodbridge, a military base in southern England, which was at the time being used by the American Air Force. A security patrol near the east gate of the base saw strange lights in the sky, which appeared to be descending into nearby Rendlesham Forest. The next day, servicemen searching the forest found 3 small impressions on the ground in a triangular pattern, as well as burn marks and broken branches on nearby trees, all indications that some kind of triangular craft had made a landing in the forest. Even more dramatically, the following night, a small team led by the Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt went out to the site with a Geiger counter to check for radioactivity. Halt was recording the event using a small dictaphone when something incredible happened.
305. We see strange strobe-like flashes to the rather sporadic, but there's definitely something, some kind of phenomenon. 305 at about 10 degrees horizon directly north. We've got 2 strange objects, half-moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. But guessed to be about 5 to 10 miles out, maybe less.
This was an audio tape that he did into a little dictaphone, and he made a series of audio commentaries, little updates on it over 4 or 5 hours. So he'll give a regular update saying, we're now crossing the creek, we can see an object, blah, blah, blah. But one of the exciting things that happened is that at one point they see an object move towards them, stop above their heads at 1,000 feet, and then shine like akin to a laser beam down at their feet.
Watch, straight ahead off west right there. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. So can I get some? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks to be out maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
2 weeks after the incident, Lieutenant Halt submitted a memorandum recording what he had witnessed, which was released in 1983 under the Freedom of Information Act. A red sun-like light was seen through the trees. It moved about and pulsed. At one point, it appeared to throw off glowing particles, and then broke into 5 separate white objects and then disappeared. Immediately thereafter, 3 star-like objects were noticed in the sky. But at the time, there didn't seem to be any will to investigate the incident further.
He put in a 1-page memo of 3 paragraphs that he sent to the MOD, and supposedly the MOD said, there's no to this, even though it mentioned in the first paragraph that there was a landed triangular craft of unknown origin.
But interest in the case was reignited when the story made its way into the press in 1983.
The News of the World did a big full-page UFOs landing Suffolk, it's official.
The result was a media debunking that rivaled those seen in Project Blue Book years earlier. The moving light was identified as being the beam from a nearby lighthouse, and the 3 star-like objects were just that, stars.
Some of the explanations given by the skeptics, for example, I mean, this is UFOs seen over multiple nights. This isn't just one UFO, it's multiple, 14 or 15 separate incidents over several consecutive nights, and yet they would say that they're all done by a lighthouse.
To counter the growing skepticism about the event, in 2010, the now retired Colonel Holt signed a notarized affidavit clarifying what he saw. While in Rendlesham Forest, our security team observed a light that looked like a large eye, red in color, moving through the trees. After a few minutes, this object began dripping something that looked like molten metal. A short while later, it broke into several smaller objects which flew away in all directions. Most importantly, this new affidavit destroys the lighthouse theory. Claims by skeptics that this was merely the sweeping beam from a distant lighthouse are unfounded. We could see the unknown light and the lighthouse simultaneously. Whilst critics have pointed out that Holt's description of the lights in the affidavit does not match the one he gave in his original memo, his dramatic cassette recording, the authenticity of which is not in dispute, remains as persuasive evidence that something extraordinary happened in Rendlesham Forest that night.
Okay, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
It's a very complicated case, but suffice to say that what you have is US Air Force police officers guarding nuclear weapons, and basically over several nights they have various encounters with various shaped UFOs. And I'm involved, and I've been for the last 2.5 years, in researching the case from ground up by going through everything back to day one, and we've uncovered a lot of new evidence. Of all the cases reported worldwide, 95% have a mundane explanation, which is atmospheric, pure misidentification, etc. Just plain mistake. But then we're always left with a residue of 5% of cases, and that gets the UFO researchers interested. And then they delve down into those cases, and then you lose another 2% because they're identified after investigation. But you will always have this residue of, say, about 2 to 3%. Those cases are the ones that you should look at.
In spite of the best efforts of the CIA and other authorities, by the 1990s, public interest in UFOs was at an all-time high, and the formerly debunked Roswell incident once again came to the attention of UFO researchers. They interviewed hundreds of people who claimed to have had a connection with the events of 1947. Their conclusions were that at least one alien spacecraft crashed near Roswell, alien bodies had been recovered, and a government cover-up of the incident had taken place. Such was the popularity of the story and the allegations that something had been covered up, the Air Force issued a 1994 report along with this publicity film, which aimed to put the controversy to rest. The report revealed for the first time that the wreckage found on the Brazil Ranch was not from a weather balloon, but was in fact from an experimental high-altitude listening device that was being flown by the Air Force as part of a program named Project Mogul, and was designed to detect far-off nuclear detonations, part of the Cold War arms race with the Soviet Union. The report went on to suggest that people who claimed to have seen alien bodies had most likely been witness to nothing more than mannequins, or crash test dummies, which were frequently employed by the Air Force when testing experimental aircraft. But for many UFO researchers, the Project Mogul explanation is barely any more credible than General Ramey's weather balloon story.
It was an actual big mistake. and made it worse for the Air Force, because they found out that Project Mogul didn't operate until the mid-50s, when this occurred in 1947, and it used human 6-foot-sized plastic objects that were dropped from planes. Well, when we talk about the bodies that were reported and recovered, the aliens allegedly recovered, they were 3 feet in height, 3 to 4 feet high, so look nothing like 6-foot plastic dummies. So again, that made their stance on an explanation as untenable, really.
Researchers also point to the immediate reaction of the men at Roswell Air Base, particularly Major Jesse Marcel. Marcel was not only an Air Force intelligence officer, he was part of the elite 509th Bomb Group, which was responsible for the deployment of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. The idea that Marcel couldn't recognize and identify the wreckage of an Air Force high-altitude balloon, even an experimental Project Mogul balloon, and the breadth and scope of the subsequent cover-up suggests that whatever was being hidden, it wasn't a simple balloon-mounted listening device.
It's created an ongoing debate for many, many years. I have no doubt that a UFO crashed, and I have no doubt that certain pieces of material were recovered, as we would do. If a UFO crashed outside my window now, the police would get called, it would get cordoned off, the military would turn up and it'd be carted off and you'd never see it again.
Marcel himself maintained for the rest of his life that what he saw at the Brazil Ranch was something not of this earth.
The general rule is, if anybody knows anything about aviation, is that even stealth aircraft, for example the F-117, the little bat-wing plane, well, that was first flown in about 75, and yet it didn't become public until 1991 with the first Gulf War. So for 16 years that was in stealth, in secret mode while it was being developed. And it's roughly 15 to 20 years before it makes mainstream confirmation. Well, you've got a conundrum there, because if these objects are flying around since the 1940s, well, okay, then it's a super secret man-made object. General rule is 20 years. The fact that it hasn't come out for 70 years says it's not ours.
The 1990s were also an interesting time for NASA, with frequent space shuttle missions providing researchers with new footage to analyze.
There is one particular sequence that I'm very impressed with as a researcher, which is called the tether sequence.
Again, just moving into sunrise. 81 nautical miles now from Columbia.
On February 25, 1996, the Space Shuttle Columbia was attempting to deploy a tethered satellite system designed to investigate new sources of spacecraft power and ways to study Earth's upper atmosphere. But 5 hours into the experiment, the tether broke and the satellite floated away, and a video recording of the event appeared to show something extraordinary. Dozens of unidentified objects floating in space around the tether.
Franklin, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground. Can you describe what you're seeing?
These things are flashing, they seem to be self-illuminated, they pass underneath it. There's literally hundreds of these things all swarming around it.
The astronauts commenting on what they were recording made no particular mention of the strange phenomena, which were later dismissed as space debris and ice particles.
And they're trying to say, oh, this is ice particles. But a lot of research has been done into that footage, and you can actually track each of the objects. And so objects will suddenly appear, they'll go around it and then come back on themselves, they'll stop and then they'll go left, they'll stop and they'll go right. So they seem to be under intelligent control.
Well, the long line is a tether, and there's a little bit of debris that kind of flies with us.
Now, with the International Space Station cameras operating 24/7, providing rolling coverage of outer space, researchers are also working 24/7 to examine the footage for anomalies, in the belief that it can only be a matter of time before something is captured that cannot be debunked.
NASA itself comes under suspicion as being possibly a front, a public relations exercise. And there are some, really kind of geeky people who spend their lifetime going through archives of thousands of Apollo photographs to find a couple of anomaly photographs which can't be explained. And we owe them a debt of gratitude because most people wouldn't do that. But they do find some very good stuff that can't be explained. And similarly, there are people who study the space footage, and there are anomalies. But a lot of people suspect that the best evidence of things in space is being hidden away. There is no two ways about it. If you study the subject, if you were to intelligently look at the very, very best cases, you would think these would be front page news. And the fact that they're not means that there has to be a reason why they're not on the front page. Now, I think in a strange way, President Trump has kind of legitimized the term fake news. And that wasn't really recognized in the mainstream. But now we have fake news, and disinformation is now a real watchword in modern society. Well, it wasn't for many decades, but now it's an accepted thing. And believe me, there is so much disinformation on the UFO subject. And I always say this, that if the public really were to be presented with the best evidence, that 3% of best cases, there would be no doubt that the ET phenomena is real.
Despite the earlier claim that there had been no serious government interest in the UFO phenomenon since the closure of Project Blue Book in 1969, in December 2017, there was a surprise admission from the Pentagon. In fact, a secret study into UFOs entitled the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program had been operating for the last 5 years, with a total budget of over $20 million.
I think the Pentagon admissions in 2017 really did open the Pandora's box, because it can only lead one way. You can't actually put that information back now.
The program was initiated in 2007 by then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who in 2009 wrote a letter to the Deputy Secretary of Defense which contained some intriguing sentences.
Much progress has been made with the identification of several highly sensitive, unconventional aerospace-related findings. Given the current rate of success, the continued study of these subjects will likely lead to technology advancements that in the immediate near term will require extraordinary protection.
The announcement coincided with the release by the New York Times of leaked UFO footage recorded by US naval pilots, which was later released officially by the Pentagon in 2020.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
There's been so much frustration and lies told. However, in the 16th of December 2017, the Pentagon admitted that these things were real and they didn't know what they were, flying around the airspace. And so that changed the goalposts. And so now we're actually, I think, definitely on a path to within the next 3 to 5 years, I think significant events will push the door open.
Together with the release of the footage came admissions from the Office of Naval Intelligence that they were still holding highly classified documents pertaining to UFOs. An official statement from the Navy read,
"A review of these materials indicates that they are currently and appropriately marked and classified top secret under Executive Order 13526. And the original classification authority has determined that the release of these materials would cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security of the United States."
But with modern image-sharing technology and instant access to data of all kinds, it seems the time of governments being able to restrict access to information is coming to an end. despite the best efforts of the mainstream media and the California tech giants.
UFO researchers yearn for what's called disclosure with a big D. When it's on every TV channel, that there's this open admission that there's contact, that ET is real and it's been visiting us. That's what we're all kind of working towards, and have been working towards that for the last 70 years in this what was classed as a modern era. I think we are moving in the right direction, and I think with technology in the world that we live in now, the mass media, and the way we can instantly get stuff around the world, I think it's all looking good for a major announcement in the next few years. One thing that comes from disclosure with a big D is that the world will need to finally be truthful. So if that happens, then the world will be in a very different place. And in terms of history, the history of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century will have to be rewritten.